I'm Brian Kendall with ACFCS. We are a member organization for professionals who work to detect and prevent financial crime. Just in case you're not familiar with us, we offer a whole host of member resources, including webinars and online trainings like this one, daily news and information, and the Certified Financial Crime Specialist credential. So just in case you're not familiar with ACFCS, please visit acfcs.org for more information. So what we're going to cover on this presentation today, first off, just some level setting. We'll talk about what business email compromise actually is and how it works and who it targets. We'll talk about why it works in terms of why do people actually fall for these business email compromise schemes and what vulnerabilities are there within organizations and financial institutions that allow them to be exploited. And finally, we'll end with some guidance on both preventing business email compromise on an organizational level. In individual level, what can you do to prevent being targeted or exploited? And we'll also talk, since I know a lot of people are in compliance roles at financial institutions, we'll also talk a little bit about reporting business email compromise related transactions that you might be detecting within your institution. So let's start off by talking about the scale of business email compromise. The FBI released a alert on this through their Internet Crime Complaint Center. There's a link to that at the end of this presentation. And then they updated that alert a little bit later in the year in June of 2016. And what they found was that over 3 billion, close to 3.1 billion, had been lost in business email compromise schemes between 2013 and 2015. Over 22,000 victims from at least 79 countries had been hit by business email compromise, and that is widely considered to be a underreported figure. A lot of times people that fall victim to this don't report it to the FBI. So this is a combination of best estimates and actual reports to the FBI related to business email compromise. I would be surprised if the actual figure again weren't significantly higher. So this is big business, like a lot of other cybercrime that's out there. The perpetrators behind it are in many cases organized crime or at least organized cyber criminal operations. Chinese operations have been involved in this, Russian, a little bit more recently Nigerians who previously might have been, Nigerian operations that previously might have been focused on, you know, the Nigerian 419 scams, the classic, I am a, Saudi prince who must move $10 million into the United States. I just need a $4,000 transfer to get started, or I need your bank account info to transfer the money, that kind of thing. And a lot of these Nigerian gangs in particular were involved in credit card theft and carding operations. As chip and PIN has been implemented, the ability to do carding and credit card theft has been has declined. It's gotten harder to do, so we've seen a shift into things like ransomware and business email compromise. So despite the scale of the attacks and the money that we're seeing being lost, the complexity and the sophistication is not necessarily what you might think it is. The word business email compromise can be a little bit misleading because in a lot of cases it isn't even necessary to compromise an email account. As we'll talk about in just a second, you can spoof an account, you can impersonate somebody without ever gaining access to their email account. So a lot of times these are not a sophisticated operation and they do not take much time and effort. And again, that kind of paradoxically is one of the reasons why we're seeing such loss from them. So these are some examples of simulated or in some cases real business email compromise attacks, I guess you could call them. These are emails sent to recipients in order to get them to carry out some procedure that transfers funds to the fraudsters or the criminals behind the business email compromise scheme. That's the ultimate result. Impersonate someone within the institution or the organization in order to trigger a funds transfer, an update of account information, or in some other way a payment that transfers funds to the cyber criminals behind the scheme. And again, these are not necessarily sophisticated or elaborate messages. You see the one at the bottom is very simple. So in basic terms, there's a number of different variations on business email compromise, but in basic terms, it's typically involving a company impersonating, or sorry, a individual impersonating a company executive or higher up individual at the company, sending an email to a employee directing them to transfer funds. The employee then follows up on that request. They transmit the request to the financial institution with the wire transfer instructions that were received from the supposed CEO. It might be something like, we have a vendor that we absolutely need to pay today. You need to get this out by the end of the day. Here's the wire transfer instructions. Email me and let me know as soon as this is finished. In a variation on this, sometimes the cyber attackers will impersonate the CEO directly in contact with financial institution, or they might impersonate a lawyer representing the company or another senior figure at the company, contact the financial institution directly and attempt to initiate a funds transfer. This can target any number of organizations and entities. It's certainly not limited to financial institutions. We've seen law firms be hit heavily by business email compromise schemes. One of the reasons for that, as we saw in the Panama Papers scheme, law firms hold a lot of data that can be potentially very valuable and very attractive for cyber attackers. They also can hold funds and conduct transfers on behalf of clients in addition to holding their own funds and conducting their own transfers. Another reason law firms sometimes have weaker cybersecurity, although I think the sector overall has improved, than sectors like the financial institution space. So they're, in some instances at least, softer targets for business email compromise. So you see the law firms being targeted in business email compromise schemes. Another common type of business that's targeted is companies with global supply chains and a lot of vendors or suppliers that they purchase from. So one variation on the business email on the kind of classic CEO-based business email compromise fraud is to impersonate a supplier, contact a company, impersonate one of their suppliers and say, look, we have a new account, that's information's just been updated, please send all payments on an ongoing basis to this account. For companies with large global supply chains and a lot of suppliers, that might be a routine process. And they might not even notice that they've been sending payments to a false account until, weeks later, in some instances where the supplier contacts them and says, hey, we haven't been paid in a long time. So again, a wide variety of businesses can fall victim to these types of email compromise schemes. Who do they typically impersonate? The CEO is the most popular. President, managing director, president, and CEO. Between those roles, you have the bulk of individuals who cyber attackers are impersonating in these types of business email compromise schemes. Basically, the senior management at the institution is who they're trying to, in some way, represent when they send this message to trigger a funds transfer. So the question is, how do they find out who that person is, and how do they craft a message that gets the results they're looking for? A lot of times it's very easy to do, and I use law firms as an example because a lot of times some of the senior-most people at a law firm are just listed on the website. It's very easy to find out who the managing partner is, the managing director is, that kind of thing. In other cases, you might need to do a little bit of digging. So you might use open source data on businesses like Open Corporates. Is a database of companies around the world. It's very easy to find information on companies, their directors, their managers, their shareholders, if they're listed in some kind of corporate registry. All of that can be accessed through a site like Open Corporates, or Manta is another one. There's a whole bunch out there. You can use a people search like Spokio, Intellius, again, dozens of others to find information about individuals. And obviously you can use LinkedIn as well as other social media sites where people will willingly share information, and you can find a wealth of information on who is in what role at what company. Now, in addition, as you're doing this kind of open source research, you're going to want to understand who they connect to, who are other employees in the organization, and if you are kind of a savvy business email compromise fraudster, you're probably going to be looking for things like how they speak. So on LinkedIn, you might read recommendations, and you might use a open source visualization tool. This one's called Market Visual. You can search for individuals, you can search for companies, and it provides a map of individuals at that company and how they're connected, not just to the company, but in some cases to one another. And it's a little hard to see, but you can see on the right-hand side there, it'll even tell you if it's known, the role of this individual within the organization. So if I'm trying to, I've identified the CEO, and now I'm trying to find members of the finance department, maybe the CFO or a more senior person in the finance department who I'm going to impersonate the CEO and send my message to, then I could use this, visualization tool, for example, to help figure that out. And in my open source research that I've done on LinkedIn, I can see that, this individual is connected to the CFO, the CEO is connected to the CFO on LinkedIn, and in fact, they've written them a recommendation. And they've used a nickname, and they've called him, Rich instead of Richard. And they've said Rich is a great employee, can't speak highly enough of him, so on and so forth. So now I've gleaned all of this information about how they speak, the individual who I'm going to send my targeted message to. I've even learned, the nickname, some of the writing style, the way they talk to them, just from open source research. Now I'm going to have to, now that I know who I'm impersonating and I have my target set, and again, I might target multiple individuals. I might not just be the CFO, or if the CFO doesn't work, I might go down the ladder and try a less senior employee within the finance department. Now that I have my target set, I'm going to figure out how I impersonate the individual that I'm representing in this business email compromise scheme. One way is to simply use an online email spoofing tool. There's lots of them out there. This is one of them, Spoof My Email. Anybody can go on there. They can type in what email address they want to impersonate, and they can send it off. So if I have obtained the CEO's email address, or I've obtained the typical structure of emails within the company, and I know that it's first name dot last name at companyname.com, then I can use this spoofing tool, and I can go ahead and send it off to the individuals in question. And it'll look like, again, it comes from the CEO of the company. It'll come from their domain name. I can put the subject line, content, so on and so forth. A lot of times you'll see in these business email compromise emails, they say something like sent from my iPhone or something like that at the bottom. They'll use that to kind of cover up the fact that the email might not exactly look like an email from the company's email server, or it might not have the typical signature in it. So again, if you see something like that, that's another way to kind of detect something might be wrong in a business email compromise scheme. But anyway, these kinds of spoofing tools, very common way, kind of in the lower end, I guess you could say, the less sophisticated business emails compromise schemes. There's many others out there. There's one called MK's Mailer that you can use as well, but that is one way to approach it. Another way to approach it would be to attempt to actually obtain access to a CEO's email account. There's a lot of ways to go about this, but you could use a keystroke logger, or you could use a spear phishing message to do so. I just read about one scheme where it was basically a cascading effect of cyber attackers getting into accounts at a company. So they managed to get into one company account, either through open source intelligence, or finding their password online, or whatever the case may be, which we'll talk about in just a second. And then from there, and this was a lower level employee, but from there they were able to utilize that person's contact list and utilize a spear phishing message that had a fake invoice attached, and target other people within the company. And they would send it to the next person in the company, send it to the contact list, And they even used subject lines. They looked through past emails. They used subject lines that this individual had used in the past, or very similar subject lines. They read conversations with individuals that this person whose account they had compromised had in the past, so they understood the writing style, the topics they were covering, so on and so forth, and they crafted messages accordingly. Every time somebody clicked on that message, it downloaded this keystroke logger. This is just an example of what a keystroke logger might look like from the cybercriminal end. This box to the right here is, how you can set up your keystroke logger malware that you've downloaded from, one of these sites online. But in any case, in this compromise scheme, once they had compromised one account, send out these messages, some portion of the contracts would click on the fake invoice attached to the message. That would download a keystroke logger onto their computer. The cyber attacker would then collect every time they had typed into the keyboard and have it transmitted back to them. That would allow them to parse out the keystrokes on the keyboard and find passwords. Find passwords into email, find passwords into other accounts, and then get access to the next employee's account, and so on and so forth. So you can compromise accounts in a number of different ways. Again, open source research and spoofing is one way. Using malware might be another way to do it. Another way would be using the wealth of data that's available online. Yahoo had a massive data breach. 500 million accounts, maybe as many as 1 billion accounts by some estimates out there. Sites like, services like Uber had their account information leaked. Healthcare records from Anthem, a whole host of other sites have all been leaked online. This information is purchasable, and it might include usernames and passwords for these sites. Those can then be tried by cyber attackers for other sites, other services. Go to Gmail, see if the username and password is the same, so on and so forth. So reuse this information, either purchase the information directly, like in the case of Yahoo, I can purchase someone's username and password to get into their Yahoo account and then go try it out to see if it's still active. And, as many of us do, there is a wealth of information in people's email accounts. There might be usernames and passwords to other accounts. There might even be username and passwords or links or other material that can help an attacker access their work account. So in any case, there's lots of avenues that an individual could use to spoof an email or impersonate a CEO. Or other representative of a company. But once they do, they can craft a relatively well-written, compelling message. They can use the right wording, use the right subject line. They might even know about if they've managed to actually compromise the business account and research, go through the email account to try to learn about the company's policies and procedures for initiating wire transfers or authorizing wire transfers. They might even know the right procedure in some cases, and they might say something like, I know this isn't necessarily, how we usually do things, but I really need this to go out by the end of the day. It's an urgent request, so on and so forth, or something like that to further reinforce the impression that they are legitimate. The other thing that a lot of times the more sophisticated attackers will do is they'll use flattery. They'll target a mid-level employee, sometimes even a low-level employee, and they'll be very nice to them. They'll say, you've done a really good job on this. I really appreciate your help. Thank you so much. Just want to make sure this is going to get taken care of. And the person involved, as any person would be, is flattered that the CEO has taken notice of them. So they exploit these human aspects, these human vulnerabilities, in addition to some of these more technical vulnerabilities. Despite the fact that you can do it in this kind of elaborate spear phishing type way, business email compromise in many cases is not that sophisticated. I just want to reinforce that point. Some of the most popular subject lines are things like request, just one word, or transfer, or request for, and then a date. And then the message itself is very short. Please initiate this payment to this individual. It has to go out by the end of the day. Let me know when it's done. Things like that. Or we are a supplier, we're updating our account information. Here's our new account instructions. Please let us know when it's updated. Why do these work? Why do people fall for them? Well, people want to be helpful. Again, it's human nature to be helpful, to get to follow up with requests in a timely manner, and especially if it's coming from senior management, there's a lot of incentive to get it done. And again, fraudsters will play on that. They'll use wording like urgent. They'll say it needs to be done by the end of the day. They'll say this is a very time-sensitive request. They'll send it, shortly before working hours are over, and again say that this really needs to be done ASAP to add that element of pressure and that likelihood that somebody will let it slip and make a mistake. So all of these aspects play on the human nature angle. So when we're turning and looking at how do you detect and prevent, or how do you prevent business email compromise, the best way to do it is training and awareness, because it is ultimately tricking someone into typically overriding or ignoring the right procedures for initiating a wire transfer, updating an account, changing information that allows business email compromise to take place. So having training, having awareness, having a level of skepticism is the first and best defense. You also want to have people able to understand the small errors and small oddities, I guess you could say, in emails that indicate something is a fraudulent request. So one example is right here. You have things like ABC Corporation C.OM. This indicates that somebody set up an email server. They created a fake domain name, email address, essentially, that was very similar to the company's actual email address, but might be one letter off or have an underscore instead of have both words together or something like that. Little things that can be easy to miss. And that's one way to, again, spoof an email, is to create a server, create this fake domain name that's very close, but the dot, instead of .com, it might be .net, so on and so forth. So having employees who, if they see something that looks suspicious or they get that urgent request, first step is review the email. Look for these small errors. Look at the sender's address to see if there's anything that might be wrong. Review the email header. If the email has been spoofed, the email header is essentially more detail, more technical detail on who actually sent the email and where it came from. And you can check the header, and if it is a spoofed email, the email address will not be the email address that the spoofer put in. It'll be the email address of the spoofing service. And it'll be very easy to tell that this is fake. So check the email header. Checking the email header and understanding how to check the email header is one important step in training and awareness. There's some examples here. Again, you can use this as a reference going forward, but it's a useful exercise if you get any suspicious email, not just a business email compromise related scheme. And then on the policies and procedures standpoint, you want to have steps in place to prevent this. And again, you want to test and train your employees who are responsible for this. A lot of organizations have these steps in place, but they're overridden, again, because of the manipulative nature and these simple manipulative tricks that fraudsters and cyber criminals employ in these types of schemes. So it's not just having the procedures, it's testing them, sending a spoofed email, trying this out, seeing how well it sets up. These kinds of simulation exercises a lot of organizations are doing, and they can be very helpful, but having multiple employees confirming their suppliers, so on and so forth, that's one very simple. If you get a message from the CEO, do you just click reply to the message and say, hey, just want to confirm that this is, legit and absolutely needs to go out by the end of the day today? No, you should try to confirm it through another channel, a known channel. If the CEO has, a cell phone number on file, call the cell phone number. Don't call a number in the subject line of the email. That, in some cases is another step that fraudsters might use, which goes to somebody who's, one of the cyber criminals or working with the cyber criminals and will confirm the request. So use another channel to confirm unusual requests or requests that don't match the policy and procedure of the organization. There are internal factors that increase vulnerability and risk, and some of these are reasons why law firms can sometimes be vulnerable, in addition to other organizations. If there's a company culture that discourages questioning or even communicating with senior management, makes it much more difficult to confirm or deny these urgent requests. If the company values confidentiality and speed over a kind of careful step-by-step diagnosis of things like payment instructions and wire transfer instructions, then you can run into the situation easily. It discourages employees from even communicating with each other. And if members of the finance team can override or disregard controls in regards to transfers, account updates, and other payments, especially if one person can do it. And this is why you need that multiple confirmation before it can be initiated. If you have a situation where only one person is responsible, that creates a serious vulnerability. There's also the personal aspect of this. You as an individual also need to make sure that you are not vulnerable. And it's not just business email compromise, it's any number of cybercrime schemes. So we'll talk in just a second about have I been pwned or have I been pawned. It's a site where you can go, put in your email address and see if it's been exposed in any of these data breaches, or put in your name and see if your data from LinkedIn or Anthem or Yahoo or any of these other massive data breaches is out there on the internet. It's a very handy tool to understand if your data has been exposed, because again, cyber criminals, including business email compromise related schemes, are going to potentially do research, find your account information, and potentially use you as a vulnerability or an entry point into your organization. So understanding your information and understanding how it's potentially exposed on the net is one step to protect both yourself and your organization. Secure passwords. This site, How Secure Is My Password, is one where you can check password strength. Very basic but useful exercise. We'll talk about a couple more tips in just a second. One of the things I want to highlight for individuals who are in the compliance world is this FinCEN advisory. And there are really two of them that you should know about. There's one more recently that talked about cyber-enabled frauds and gave tips on STAR filing related to cyber-enabled frauds. One of the things that's said in there is that you have to file a SAR, suspicious activity report, for any fraud that is likely to have or would have been likely to cause $5,000 or more in financial harm. And that obviously includes a lot of business email compromise schemes. So if you're seeing transactions come in related that you believe to be related to business email compromise, you should obviously be filing SARs on them. I'm sure that's not revelatory to anyone in the audience. And you should be putting words like business email compromise in the narrative in order to help law enforcement with tracking and potentially recovering any assets lost in these types of schemes. Some of the other red flags that FinCEN gave in this advisory related to business email compromise: if you see payments that are for a known beneficiary, but all of a sudden the account details are different, again, that could be this supplier type of business email compromise fraud where somebody contacts a company impersonating a supplier and provides new account information. Transaction instructions, direct payment to a beneficiary with which the customer has no payment history or documented business relationship. Again, somebody is impersonating a CFO. They direct the finance people to initiate a wire transfer to this account in Hong Kong or Singapore or other countries. A lot of times we've seen the money in business email compromise schemes going to places like Hong Kong and China. For whatever reason, those tend to be popular destinations. So if you're seeing funds transfers to those locations that a company hasn't sent before, if you're seeing, or if you are contacted directly by somebody saying, I'm the managing director or I'm the account signatory and I need this wire transfer to go to this location, that's something you really need to keep an eye on. Likewise, if you see a successful payment to an account that wasn't previously used, and then you see a flurry of transaction instructions or the initiation of a series of wire transfers to that account, that's going to be a big red flag. That indicates that the cyber criminals were waiting to see if this would work, and now they're following up with a whole bunch of other requests for payment in an effort to milk this for as long as they can. In terms of reporting business email compromise from the financial institution side, if you do see these transactions coming through, filing a SAR, including BEC in the narrative portion, can be helpful. Capturing as many details as possible for law enforcement within that SAR filing. The general details of how this carried out. The email header content can be useful for detecting who was actually behind it. Usually you're not going to be able to, it's not like the FBI is going to be able to go catch these guys, but at least understanding the threats, their location, tracing it, developing cases over time, and obviously the wire and ACH instructions that were received in the business email compromise request can be very helpful for tracing and potentially recovering funds. The FBI has said that voluntarily notifying them in addition to SAR filing can be very helpful, especially if it's done very quickly, to actually recover or prevent loss in business email compromise schemes. If they can get the information within 24 hours, there's a much higher likelihood that they can actually stop the transfer or claw back some of the funds that are being sent, typically overseas, to these institutions. So contact the FBI Secret Service, or you can put in an online notification on the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center. Again, the sooner the better. Also consider reporting through your FS-ISAC. For financial institutions that are a part of an FS-ISAC, you have a portal on your site that you can actually share information. You can say, hey, we're seeing this trend. We're seeing, or, we saw this business email compromise scheme. We've seen several that use similar language, whatever the case may be. And again, sharing information on the general details can be very helpful for other financial institutions that are part of these FS-ISACs. You can also contact your point of contact within the FS-ISAC to do the same. So I know we're a couple minutes over time, but just rounding it out, things that you can do to protect your organization and yourself. And we touched on both of these, but these can be really helpful when you're looking ahead. It's simple stuff, but again, this is not necessarily sophisticated attacks. So even the simple stuff helps. In addition to training and awareness, carefully reviewing emails. And as part of that, learning how to access the email header. Again, there's more details on how to do that with some popular services on that slide. Checking if your data may have been compromised. There's a whole bunch of sites that can help you with this. Leaked source, have I been pawned? Check if your username, passwords, other credentials may have already been exposed in data breaches and therefore vulnerable to use by cyber criminals. If they have been, you obviously want to update usernames, passwords as soon as possible so that somebody that's purchased this on the dark web or whatever the case may be can't access your accounts. And then finally, start creating a data hygiene plan. On one very simple way to start with this is pick a date every 2 weeks to change your password and have some accountability within that. Just like your organization probably forces periodic password updates on its network, you should have periodic password updates on your own services that you use, whether it's a Gmail account, Yahoo account, bank, online bank login, whatever the case may be. So find a colleague who might help you with that and commit to, confirm with you that you've done it. It can be useful. Again, simple stuff, but can really help in a lot of cybercrime related incidents. Finally, some additional resources. FinCEN's advisory to financial institutions on email compromise fraud schemes. If you haven't checked that out, short document, only a few pages, but again, useful, includes a number of red flags, and includes a little bit more detail about how these schemes play out. FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center alert from June 14th, 2016 includes some statistics on business email compromise fraud and a little bit more information on how you can report or share info with the FBI, also a useful resource. Business email compromise schemes, this Trend Micro, basically, site that they put together, has a wealth of information. It describes a number of common schemes in greater detail than we got into here, also recommended. And then finally, the FS-ISAC fraud alert on business email compromise. Again, a little bit of additional detail and more info on how to share information with your FS-ISAC. So again, this is a booming industry, multi-billion dollar fraud scheme. I don't expect it to be declining anytime soon because it's so profitable and so easy, and there's very little chance that these email compromise fraudsters get caught. So this is going to be prevalent out there, but the good news is that by doing some relatively simple things, being aware, implementing training, and having some tight controls in place, your institution and your organization can generally safeguard themselves. So that's it for this inaugural quick tips. At this time, I open it up for questions. Again, please do type your questions into the Q&A box. I apologize for going over a little bit. Try to tighten it up, and again, keep it within the half hour for the next one. But I just want to thank everyone for joining us. Really appreciate taking the time and attention for this short little session. Please do join us for future presentations. Please do leave your thoughts in the survey. Let us know feedback on this session, topics you'd like to see us potentially cover on future quick tips, and any other details that would be helpful to you. Just want to say thanks again, and have a great afternoon, everyone.